This week on the Andrew Yang Podcast. Happy holidays! Coming up, we have our editor and audience picks from your favorite episodes of the year. And next week, Zach and I will be back with our New Year's predictions. What do we think is going to happen? Only one way to find out. Thank you for listening. Stay safe this holiday season and have a great new year. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast economics writer for The Atlantic, host of Plain English, which is a really popular Ringer podcast you should definitely check out, and co-author of the brand new book, Abundance, Derek Thompson. Welcome, Derek.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
One thing I just wanted to share because, I think you'll enjoy it. Abundance, I think, is a very important set of ideas and a very important book. And I'm really thrilled that you and Ezra are making this contribution. I just had on the podcast in the last 3 weeks the author of Why Nothing Works, Mark Dunkelman, who's making a similar case. And then Stuck by Yoni Applebaum, which like book length on the zoning. And so when I was reading, the abundance chapter on zoning, that obviously felt very, very familiar because I literally just read Stuck, a few weeks ago. And I feel like there's now this mini canon that you guys have built that is trying to address some of the drawbacks or failings or limitations of some of the institutions that are democratically, or should say led by Democrats at present. And the Yoni story is around hey, zoning laws have made it impossible to build. So guess what? Housing in New York is crazy expensive and people aren't moving here. And if everyone got to move wherever they wanted, then you'd have a much more efficient economy. And I think there was a point in the book where you actually say look, me and Ezra, we're actually kind of pointing this to the Democratic Party so that it can speed up.
Yeah, it's great. I love the idea of a mini abundance canon, and I do think we're all contributing toward the same idea, Yoni, Mark, Ezra, and me. I think there's a really powerful historical story to tell here, and I'd love to just take a bit of time to tell it, because it really deeply informs the project as Ezra and I see it. Going back 100 years, there's really been two major political orders. This is the Cambridge historian Gary Gerstl's term for a period of history where the parties agree on enough geopolitical and economic ideas that those agreements move history beyond the fights that determine 2, 4, and 6-year election cycles. You had the New Deal order, which reigned between the 1930s and 1960s, and the neoliberal order, which reigned between the 1970s and the 2010s. And each order tends to be defined by both an internal crisis and an external threat. So in the 1930s, you had the internal crisis of the Great Depression and the external threat of the global specter of socialism. And the New Deal was a way of solving for both problems at the same time. We emboldened government to act and to build things. And we really did. I mean, we built, in the 1930s, the Tennessee Valley Authority. We used the Work Progress Administration to hire millions of people during the downturn. And then even in the 1950s, Dwight D. Eisenhower in many ways acquiesced to the New Deal order by governing as something like an FDR liberal, even though he was a Republican.
It wasn't a Democratic-Republican thing, to your point. Yeah.
Exactly. He's talked about social welfare or welfare policies as if there was something to extend. He built the interstate highway system, which had its flaws, absolutely, but also was, I think, an extension of this era of building, this growth machine that came up after World War II. And that really changed in the 1970s, because in the 1970s you had a new internal crisis and external threat that defined the next political order. The internal crisis was a lot of cultural resentment at the collectivism of the New Deal order and the crisis of stagflation, which FDR-style liberalism could not solve. We needed some new paradigm to address it in the minds of people. But also there was a new external threat. The Soviet Union meant something else in the 1980s than Russia meant in the 1920s and 1930s. And so the neoliberal order in many ways was this flourishing of a very particular style of individualism. And that individualism was represented by the deregulation styles of Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, and even to a certain extent Bill Clinton. It was represented by a sense that people on the new left, the poets and beatniks, and people on the right, the libertarian right, the economists like Milton Friedman, both talked about the individual being someone who needs to rail against the system, and this praise for like the solo individual against the collectivist crowd was a very, very keen idea in the 1960s and 1970s. And so we codified this new order of neoliberalism. And in many ways, just as Dwight D. Eisenhower acquiesced to an order invented by FDR, Bill Clinton, to a certain extent, acquiesced to an order inaugurated by Ronald Reagan. He believed in smaller government. He believed in deregulation. He was a liberal in some ways, but he was also very much a liberal for the age of Reagan. Our claim in our book is that we didn't just go from an age of New Deal liberalism to an age of neoliberalism. We went from an age of the growth machine, of constant change to the physical world, to the age of the anti-growth machine, an age of zoning, an age of environmental review, an age where NEPA and CEQA and all these laws...
Vetocracy.
And the you could say in a way, just to keep up with the rhyming game, that the New Deal created an era of bureaucracy and the neoliberal era created an order of Vetocracy. And now we're living in a world of both, where government is weirdly, in many cases, both big and weak. We're saying that the problems or the tools brought to bear by neoliberalism, or what at least Gerstle calls this era of neoliberalism, no longer serve us today. They don't solve affordability. They don't solve climate change. They don't solve the problem of ineffective governance where Democrats have the most power. And they don't solve the problem I just talked about understanding scientific and technological institutions and reforming them to pull forward the most important inventions in medicines. And so one thing we're trying to do here is to redefine the next political order. And of course, that sounds ludicrously grandiose.
I love it.
That's the scale. That's the scale of the ambition.
I'm there for it.
What's really important to us is to find a way to get these ideas into the public conversation. If people disagree, that's wonderful. There is no world in which every single Democratic candidate in 2027 defines themselves as an abundance liberal. In fact, if too many of them do, then it will reduce the value of any one person identifying themselves as an abundance liberal. We recognize and are prepared for the fact that some people are going to disagree with this. They're going to want to emphasize antitrust more. They're going to want to emphasize welfare more. And I want to be clear, we are absolutely pro-welfare liberals, and antitrust plays, I think, a major critical role in consumer
exclusive.
protection.
Yeah,
they're not mutually exclusive at all.
Yeah, totally.
It's a matter of emphasis. There's going to be people who want to emphasize, oligarchy more and attack billionaires first. We're certainly not against the idea that there are bad billionaires afoot. But to quickly juxtapose, I think, the message of abundance versus the message that the most important thing to do is to name and shame the billionaires is something like this. One of the most important problems that we identify in the book is the fact that in areas, states, and cities where liberals, Democrats have the most power, that's where we have the worst housing crisis.
Oh, yeah. And then Ezra talks about how you have hundreds of thousands of people that are relocating out of New York
and the housing crisis is
Illinois.
Cashing out in hundreds of thousands of people, leaving places that Democrats are governing. The reason that San Francisco's housing is a mess, and California's housing is a mess, and Portland's housing is a mess, and Oregon's housing is a mess, and et cetera, Elon Musk has nothing to do with any of that. Elon Musk has nothing to do with the housing politics of Oregon. We need to be clear-eyed about how we are doing this to ourselves. And that's a really tough message for people to hear, because Donald Trump is so destructive and is so dangerous. And the threat that he poses to constitutional order and democracy is so...
He wouldn't be in position to be president and win if some of the things that you're describing had been addressed like X years earlier. I mean, that to me, it's like he is president for the second time, in part because of some of the institutional failures. Now, none of us has a time machine, but one of the things I just want to quote from the book, it said, like, the Democratic Party can't be the party of the working class if the working class can't afford to live in the place they govern.
That seems inarguable to me. I don't know how we can possibly claim to be the party of the working class if we're the party of the cities and the states where the working class are leaving. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And they're moving to states like Texas and Florida where they can afford a better life. And in those states, you have much more Republican governance. We should be scandalized by this. We should be absolutely embarrassed and scandalized and angry about the fact that we are losing the working class, not just at the polls, but they're voting with the most expensive voting mechanism they have, which is with their feet. It's very cumbersome to move. You only move when you're desperate, especially if it's across the country. And so their desperation is a deep, deep indictment of the low level of democratic governance in these states. We should think of the places that we govern as potentially being advertisements for our cause, not anti-advertisements, right? As we say in the book, we should hope that we point to California and say, vote for Democrats and we'll make America like California. And instead right now is we have lots of Republicans who think they have advantage in saying, vote for Democrats and they'll make America like California. That's what it looks like when you make the places you control an anti-advertisement. And we should hope that the process of rebuilding power for Democrats and liberalism in this country begins at that local level, right? Begins at building power where we already have it, turning the places that we control, turning the places we've been elected into advertisements for our cause. That's the beginning, I think, of this movement.
Thank you, listeners. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, send them to mailbag@andrewyang.com, and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast one of the great unsung heroes of business, the founder and CEO of Propel, which we'll hear about, Jimmy Chen.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
You kidding, Jimmy? Thanks for taking the time from alleviating poverty. And some people here think that I want to alleviate poverty, which I totally do. I've run around trying to do so and occasionally having, some achievements. But you've been doing the real thing now for a number of years, and I can't wait for people to hear about it. Oh, what part of the U.S. did you grow up in? Or did you come over as an immigrant?
Came over as an immigrant from China when I was 4 years old. My parents and I settled in Kansas City, so that's where I grew up and spent most of my childhood.
So Kansas City, you grew up I have actually been to Kansas City, and it's a perfectly pleasant, fun environment. Does this make you a Chiefs fan?
Yeah. I think it makes me a lifelong Kansas City sports fan of all types.
Okay, so then you come of age in Kansas City. You got to Stanford, which I'm going to say is a very abundant environment.
Totally.
You wind up working at some name brand tech companies, but then you decide to try and build Propel as a company that's going to trying to address poverty.
Yeah. I mean, it was, to me, Propel was sort of the culmination, or not the culmination, but the combination of the different kind of things that I had seen in my personal life, right? Growing up in a household where we had some financial needs, going to Stanford on a full financial needs scholarship, and then after Stanford, getting jobs in consumer technology. I mean, I think like many people at Stanford, I got really into technology, was entranced by this idea of like writing code, building websites and apps, like this cool thing in Silicon Valley happening at the time. I landed at a few different tech companies out of college, big social networks as they were scaling up, got to go through several of the IPOs of Silicon Valley and just learned a lot from a lot of smart people. And one of the things that I learned from those people is that there's kind of a conventional wisdom in Silicon Valley is to solve the problems that you personally experience. And I think that makes a ton of sense. If you're trying to start a ride sharing company or an online dating company or even a B2B play that like solve some kind of business need that you as a business person have personally experienced. But one of the things I kept thinking about, especially later in my time in the Valley, was, hey, there are people who are using technology and using the internet very natively, but who may not have the means or the network to build the technology for their own needs. And so the internet was becoming more and more useful for people who are like me, people who knew how to code, who lived in San Francisco, who worked in the tech industry. And it was not becoming very useful for people like my parents as I was growing up, who grew up in, we were living in the middle of the country and we didn't have a lot of money. And, for those very different types of needs, there are almost like two different internets, right, of people who are building the Ubers and Airbnbs of the world versus people who are just trying to make it by on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, this is a critique a lot of us have heard. It's like, hey, you guys are solving first world problems. You want that speedy food delivery in your San Francisco flat. Like, we've now got several competing apps for that. But do we have anyone trying to make it so you can access your government benefits in a way that makes sense? Which is the idea for Propel. So you're 26 and you start talking to people about how the internet could be improved for them. So what did you find out?
Well, I just learned a ton about how people spent their days and started to the way that I sort of approached those conversations was just trying to be curious and to poke at things that I felt like I didn't fully understand or that I didn't have personal experience with. And one of the things that I heard time and again was the amount of time and energy people spent navigating the social safety net.
Yeah. Heck yeah, man.
And it struck me that that's one of the things that is different between how a low income family might spend their time versus a medium or high income family. Just by definition, the social safety net in the United States is generally available to people who are lower income, but not to people that are middle or high income. And so people talk about, the common complaint is hey, the DMV sucks to stand in line and use the website and things like that. But people of all economic spectrums have to use the DMV, right? Only people that are low income know what it's like to apply for the food stamp program or to navigate Medicaid. And it struck me that this is a whole category of user experiences in software that are pretty invisible to the people who work in tech because they've never had to, by and large, they haven't had to experience them themselves. But it also seemed like an incredibly important part of the internet, right? The software that you use
tens of millions of people every day
to put food on the table for yourself or to get healthcare, to get housing, that seems like some of the most important software on the internet. It really needs to work really well. And so that led me down the path of let me try it myself. Let me go apply for food stamp benefits myself. Let me
And I'm sure you found it was a breeze and nothing to see here. And you're like, oh, no problem to be solved.
Yeah, not quite, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. I bet it was a nightmare.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, but it's not that it was just a nightmare. It was it was a nightmare that gave me some optimism, right? Because a lot of the things that could be solved were just very practical issues that were, in tech, we would call them solved problems, right? You don't have to invent some new AI frontier model to solve these things. It's we just need to make this website work on a smartphone, or we just need to reduce the number of fields on this form and make it so that the button is clickable by you. Right, things in a very basic sense, the types of things that I learned in college around user experience design and how to design around the needs of individuals. That was sort of the premise for Propel. Is could we build a technology company whose DNA was truly a technology company that hired people who had worked at other major consumer tech companies and had kind of that tech skill set, but who really, really wanted to apply that skill set to the specific needs of low-income people who navigate the safety net.
All right, so I've got a couple of major questions. So the first is, some people listening to this would be like, okay, I buy that these government websites sucked and that they probably hadn't been updated for a while. They were super user unfriendly. And a lot of people sense that our government makes the safety net almost intentionally difficult to navigate because it's sort of punitive. It's like, hey, if you're stuck trying to navigate the system, we're going to make it really tortuous for you. And then maybe you get denied for something, and then, you don't get the money and we spend a little bit less on this stuff. And so that there's a sense that it's almost deliberately unpleasant. But then the second thing you're looking at is okay, if you just took a smart techie, we could clean all this stuff up. But then most of us are thinking, how the heck do you clean up a government program's website? Because it's not like you're allowed to go do that. You can't just raise your hand and say. And then number two, how do you make a business case? Because Propel ended up going to investors and raising money so you could build a company.
Totally. In the 10 plus years of running Propel, we spent a lot of time talking to public servants at the state level, at the federal level, at the local level,
God bless
who
you.
run a lot of these safety net programs. I mean,
sure.
It's really God bless them, right? Because of the work that they've done. And by and large, there's not a ton of deep ideology. There's not a ton of we're trying to make this complicated to keep whatever. It's not the kind of stuff you hear in the
10
news.
Years ago,
right?
and
it's just people trying to make the system work to serve other people. And by and large, our experience has been, I don't doubt that there are some people that are intentionally trying to make things complicated, but there's a huge chunk of this that is not intentional. There's a huge chunk of this that's like, well, it's a big machine. It's like it's like hundreds of billions of dollars across 50 states with programs and complicated rules, and we're just trying to like follow the rules, get the money to the people who need them and not to the people who don't.
And what's like the total number of Americans that this describes?
Yeah, well, to talk just about the food stamp program, 42 million Americans in 22 million households. The 42 million includes children and families and so on. So we're talking about roughly 1 in 8 people in the United States is currently receiving SNAP benefits, which is more commonly known as food stamps. They get their benefits on an EBT card, which is this debit card that kind of looks like any other credit or debit card that you might receive.
Yeah.
But as an example, the kind of like mundane detail that was just kind of a software problem. When we talk to people with EBT cards, one of the things we learned is that most people check their EBT balance by calling this 1-800 number on the back of the card. And so, being a techie, being kind of naive about it, I was like, well, why isn't there a mobile banking app for the EBT card? That's how I would check my balance on my, bank balance or my credit card.
It might not be that easy for you to call this number, depending upon, like, if you were working a shift or whatnot.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's not the
modern way to do it.
It's a small piece of
madness.
friction. But I mean, one of the things we started thinking about was this is the lived experience of America's safety net. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts. Like everything is a little bit more annoying than it should be.
Yeah.
The things load a little slower. It's like you have to call this number instead of using a modern app. It's like each of the individual details might not feel like the thing that is like causing poverty in this country or anything like that. But I think in the aggregate, when you think about these 1,000 cuts, like every little inconvenience, it's the kind of stuff that I think really does like have an added impact on low income families. It creates mental load, makes it just another thing you have to think and worry about.
So for that one, did you actually make it so an app can tell them their balance?
That's right. So that's what we built. The Propel app is a free app used by more than 5 million families across the country each month who have food stamp or SNAP benefits on EBT cards. And it replaces that 1-800 number with what was, the country's first mobile banking app for the EBT card.
Wow.
It just shows you your balance and transaction history.
Wow, that'd be a big deal. Even just so you could monitor your spending and like see what's going on, like do all these modern things. So how did you get the information from the government as to how much is on everyone's card? Yeah, so in researching how to build this product in the first place, one of the things we learned is that every state contracts with a private company called an EBT processor who's required to build these essentially these websites where any cardholder can log in and see their balance and transaction history. We also learned that in financial services, there's been a big trend towards open banking and financial data access, which is the ability to, for example, tell the Venmo app that they have permission to pull money from my Bank of America account. Yeah. Right. And in financial services, there's kind of rules around this, and there's kind of standards that allow apps like Venmo to pull money from your other accounts. And so what we thought about was, well, why doesn't that apply to this thing? This is a financial service tool. The EBT card is a payment tool. It's the largest form of debit in the United States just by transaction volume. It's $100 billion in payments each year. And if we applied that same concept of give consumers the right to access their own data, so a consumer can say, hey, I want you to take my information from this web portal and show it to me in the Propel app. Yes.
That's what we do. So we facilitate that access. We get consent from the consumer to access their individual information on that portal and then show it to them in the Propel app instead.
Okay, so people listening to this are thinking, that is dope, that all these people can now see their information in a modern way. But that doesn't seem like a game changer in terms of value add. I mean, it's definitely, helpful. But what you've done with Propel is you've actually tried to address different needs where today there are even people doing things like finding jobs and achieving various financial goals via Propel.
Yeah. I think of EBT balance and the need to check your balance as the hook. It's the reason why people download the app.
That makes sense. It's like, I'm going to definitely download this app so I can see my balance.
Well, it is probably the most common interaction that Americans who use the safety net have with the safety net is checking their EBT balance.
That makes total sense.
Right. It's more frequent than anything you would do at Medicaid. It's more frequent than anything you do in Social Security. It is a, multiple times a week action because that's how often people buy food and think about how much money they have left for food. And so, by building something that allows us to get that kind of recurring interaction to become the kind of nexus by which people have this most common interaction with the American safety net, it gives us this opportunity to build trust and to give people a chance to access a lot of other services. So to your point, the Propel app doesn't just help you check your balance. We also help people to apply for jobs. So more than 3 million people have now applied for a job through Propel. We helped 700,000 people submit applications last year. We help people save money on their bills and on groceries. We help people save over $100 million on groceries and bills last year.
Wow.
We help people navigate various other government benefits, find out what else they qualify for, navigate things like Medicare and Medicaid, understand what's changing with how government benefits are, they're always changing. There's always new benefits, there's always changes to the rules. And one of the biggest challenges for people is like figuring out what's going to happen to them so they can plan around it. So that's a lot of what we build as well.
This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. It's getting cold outside. You're spending more time indoors. Maybe you have some family members who are coming to stay with you. This is a fantastic time to have a better mattress. They can sleep on it and be impressed. It means that you're thoughtful, you made it, you invested in something that they can sleep on, or maybe you just sleep on it and you give them the air mattress, whatever. We've been using Helix sleep mattresses for a number of years now, and it has been a game changer. I got the Ultra Dawn Firm mattress because that's the kind of support I need. And if you won't believe me, they have a 120-night sleep trial and limited lifetime warranty. 120 nights is a long time. Go to helixsleep.com/yang for 27% off site-wide, exclusive for listeners of the Andrew Yang podcast. That's helixsleep.com/yang for 27% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name so they know we sent you. helixsleep.com/yang. It is a thrill to welcome back to the podcast #1 New York Times bestselling author, I want to say, a Harvard professor of practice at both the Kennedy School and the Business School. You might know him from his Atlantic column about the meaning of life and how to live better. Arthur C. Brooks, welcome back, Arthur.
Hey, Andrew. Nice to see you, as always.
Well,
you're looking well. You look like you're aging in reverse. What's the secret?
I have a portrait of myself in the closet that is very haggard and worn. Well, one thing I enjoy about you, Arthur, I enjoy a lot of things about you, but you access ancient sources of knowledge, and it's certainly, much of it is very spiritual, but there are all of these faith traditions and cultures that have reckoned with the great questions. It's like, why are we here, and what's the meaning of life, and everything else. But you're also very, very modern, where you're using social media and YouTube and these new platforms to get the message out very broadly. And I do want to call attention to this video about where you said you want to be bored,
right? Essentially.
And then if you're not bored, you're missing something very, very important. And the fascinating thing is that video, last I checked, had over 7 million views.
It's crazy, isn't it?
yeah. And so I'd love to delve into, because, and one of the themes of your book that's coming out next year is that right now technology is kind of intruding upon our ability to grapple with some of like the bigger existential questions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's what my new book is about. The new book is about the meaning of life. It's called The Meaning of Your Life, Finding Purpose in an Age of Emptiness. And what I really care about is the age of emptiness. When I came back to academia, I had been gone for 11 years running this think tank. And when I left, academia was happier than ordinary life. And when I came back in 2019, it was like a plague had gone through my village. There had been a psychogenic epidemic.
Because of, when you say that, I immediately just think cancel culture.
Something had happened. That's the big mystery. It was between 2008 and 2019, rates of depression on campuses had shot up by about a factor of 3.
Your kids are sad. Yeah, that's a problem.
Sad, anxious, lonely, self-harming, being diagnosed with mood disorders at higher and higher and higher rates.
You mean teaching a bunch of anxious, depressed teens is not super happy?
Well, I shouldn't
joke about this because it's real.
And I have found greater unhappiness than I had ever seen when I had taught in academia before. So when I came back, it was a different world, and it had changed incredibly quickly. So this became kind of a Sherlock Holmes exercise for me. What happened?
What happened to the kids?
I started doing forensically, working as a behavioral scientist, which is my background. I had to bring in a lot of the philosophy and theology into it and the neuroscience. So I really had to retrain in a lot of the neuroscience to understand what was structurally happening. And I cracked the case. I know what was actually happening. The brains of young people and people my age, and you're younger than me, but adults.
Adults.
Yeah. Once it's over 50, it's like 50 and then
50 plus,
and then
whatever. Who's counting though?
50 and then many years is where it goes.
Yes.
And what you find is that what happened is our brains have changed. We've changed the way that we use our brains. And in a nutshell, here's the problem. We have hemispherically lateralized brains. This is the work of Ian McGilchrist, who's an Oxford neuroscientist, who wrote a great book called The Master and His Emissary that talks about hemispheric lateralization. The right side of your brain deals with complex issues of love and mystery and meaning, the why questions of life. The left hemisphere of your brain deals with the what and the how-to, the complicated stuff, the tasks, the efficiency, the
so the left would be like grocery list, like navigating on the way to work, like
writing
like
code,
getting stuff down,
but also scrolling YouTube. That's what your left brain is engaged in doing. The right side of your brain is dreaming and thinking and loving and asking why, all the big questions. So when you think about questions, if you can get a meaningful answer from a question in a Google search, that's a left brain question. If you can't, and a Google search would give you nothing but nonsense, it's a right brain question. AI can't answer right brain questions. AI can only answer left brain questions.
Don't tell AI that, Arthur.
Yeah, I know, because AI will tell me that. AI will come to my house and kill me like a dog, right?
Or at least AI will give you what seems like a fairly competent answer to that question.
But after about four questions, you start to stop. AI is funny because even with these AI avatars, even those that are avatars of me that I've seen with my voice and trained on millions of words that I've written, that after about 4 questions, it no longer passes the Turing test.
Fascinating.
And the reason is because it sounds like me until your brain starts to pick up the fact that it's answering right brain issues with left brain tools. And your brain won't put up with that. So any time that you're actually using left brain tools to solve right brain problems, you're going to get sad and anxious and depressed. You're going to get lonely, and you'll feel isolated. Things won't work right in your life, and you know where I'm going with this. We have become a simulated life, simulated culture. Between 2008, 2007, when the first iPhone was delivered, 2008, 2009, social media apps are going up. 2010, 2011, 2012, dating apps are going up. The culture of the small and large screen in our life has turned our life into a simulation. We're living in the matrix, and that's a left brain life. There's one thing you can't simulate, which is the meaning of life. That's what the book is about.
So take it you're not a huge fan of what my friend Hassan Minhaj calls our rectangles of sadness.
Yeah.
And when you were doping out that the kids on campus were sad, it immediately brought me to The Anxious Generation and Jonathan Haidt's book.
John's a visionary.
John is a visionary. I mean, that book came out quite recently, but I feel like you sensed this before then. I sensed this before then. And there was a body of knowledge out there that let us know, hey, these phones are messing with us, messing with our kids. I'm friends with John, and he said something to me that I was like, oh, that's really smart. John was like, look, it's messing with all of us. But if you're going to galvanize public interest around something, you focus on like a zone that's completely inarguable and also has this moral impetus, which is kids,
right? Like
teenage girls. It's like, hey, you can, in America in particular, be like, oh, you're allowed to fry your brain if you're like over a certain age. Yeah. But it's like kids. It's like
you shouldn't fry their brains.
There's probably something wrong there, and so John, in many ways, found a sweet spot, like an opportunity in underbelly, but. It's not just the kids. It's not. The point.
Here's the difference, though. And by the way, here's how this all relates to John Haidt's stuff. John Haidt's stuff, in a nutshell, is overuse of technology will make you sad and anxious. That's and it's especially social media, and it's especially app-based technologies that will rob your childhood. It will make you more sad, and it will make you more anxious. And it's unassailable. He's completely right. People who argue against it don't have the facts. They don't have the data. I've been looking at the same data. I'm a behavioral scientist just like John, and his stuff is always right. If you want to know what to think, just read John Haidt. That's what it comes down to.
I'm totally with you. I'm just like, Jonathan Haidt is always right.
Yeah.
Just like, shut up, read the book, figure it out, understand.
That's right. So then the question becomes, however, what is it that when you do these things, you get sad and anxious, that you're missing? Because that's the question, right? I mean, what is it that you really, really want? Because you can't solve the problem unless you actually get that thing. That's that thing that's being crowded out by the technology. That's the thing that's being blocked by the technology. There is a thing that you want. This is the same thing I would ask if you said, hey, man, I'm drinking all the time. I'm just like, I can't get off the sauce. I'd say, Andrew, great. Let's talk about how to get off the sauce, but let's talk about why you're drinking. Let's really talk about what it is that you want. What you want is...
What are you suggesting? No, I'm kidding.
and you want love. And this is the thing that people who get addicted to opiates, for example, opiates actually, they mimic a lot of the feelings that people have when they're in love, for example, which is one of the reasons that opiates are so...
I thought you were going to say opiates mimic smartphones, or smartphones mimic opiates.
It's like there's a lot of dopamine involved in the two mechanisms. So this is the thing. What do people actually want? And the answer is they want the meaning of life. The reason that it's actually not so bad for those of us who are older, it's not great, but it's not so bad is because we remember the before times.
Yes.
And so we have lives that are not entirely simulated. We have lives that are less simulated. We're less in the matrix.
So help our audience for a second. Check it out. I was born in 1975.
Such a kid.
I remember the before times,
Yes.
and so I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
Like, what age range are we talking about where it's like your brain was... Because I know... My brain was fully formed before smartphones. I was in a committed relationship before the dating apps.
Right. Yeah. So these are the people who, by the time 2009, 2010 was rolling around, they were still pretty young kids. And so by their adolescence, they had phones and they had smartphones. And again, there's nothing wrong with a smartphone. You just have to use it like a tool because that's all it is. It has to be, the smartphone or any technology should be an adjunct to your left hemisphere for tasks. It shouldn't be an adjunct to your right hemisphere, which is meaning, questions, mystery, and love. That's not what it should be. And if it is, then it becomes a real problem. That's what it's been for people who are usually, we're talking right now 30 and under, maybe a little bit older, 35 and under. These are people who don't have a meaningful memory of the before times, how this comes about. So the result of it is that they've neglected the right hemisphere of their brain and become incompetent in questions of meaning. So John Haidt's stuff, which is unambiguous of all the damage that overuse of technology is doing, especially to young people, the reason it's doing such damage is because they're not examining, delving into these deep meaning questions in life. Why am I alive? For what would I give my life? What am I trying to do? Why do things happen the way they do? Why is my life significant? That's all right brain stuff. And the more time you spend on your screen, the less you're going to actually be in those spaces.
I'm not much of a cook. I enjoy getting my meals. It takes a lot of consideration, and I don't like to think very much. There are a number of things I don't like to do. And when you get a Factor meal, you know it's going to be tasty, healthy. Factor's chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals are ready to eat. Just heat them up in a few minutes, and you will be eating fresh, healthy food in no time. My favorite is the horseradish encrusted chicken. And I have to say, you can tell the meals are healthy even as they taste great. You know that sweet spot? That's what these meals hit. Get started at factormeals.com/yang50off and use code yang50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. That's code yang50off at factormeals.com/yang50off for 50% off plus free shipping. Factormeals.com/yang50off. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast, for the first time in person, markets reporter for the Wall Street Journal and CNBC contributor Gunjan Banerji. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. I'm excited for this.
Me too. So I reached out to you because you did some very, very long-term reporting on men who'd gotten themselves into a bit of addictive behaviors in terms of options trading, cryptocurrency. Sometimes they were going to meetings to try and wean themselves off of this addiction. And so for some context for you, I did an episode about sports gambling a little while ago and how the legalization has had negative effects on men. So we were focused on this one behavior. And people distinguish between gambling and investing. But unfortunately, some forms of investing have grown to resemble gambling type behaviors.
That's right. The lines between investing, trading, and gambling have never been as thin as they are
I
right
can
now.
see that for sure.
It's incredibly tough to tell the difference. And what I found, attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings for a lot of last year, interviewing dozens of doctors, treatment centers, individual investors, dozens and dozens of them, I found that more and more men say that they are struggling with compulsive gambling, not in sports, not at casinos, but in the financial markets, on apps like Robinhood. They say that once they start trading, they cannot stop.
I can so easily see, though, that if someone got a win in investing, then they would say, let me double down on this, and this is going to be my new job. And it's so much faster and more efficient seeming than doing some kind of hourly job
Right.
where you're going to get paid a certain amount and it's predictable and kind of so one thing about, I'm going to say men, is that we can tell ourselves a story about our hitting it big.
Okay.
And when I was talking to the guy who was, on the sports gambling, is that it combines all these things that men love, which is risk, speed, technology, feeling like you're smarter than other people. So there's like a sense of power.
Okay.
And status, and work all kind of merged into one. And so the status part is that if you do hit some big trade, you really want to brag about it.
Yes.
That's a lot of the fun.
Totally. I think that's almost as exciting, right? To tell your online followers about this win. And, I have a stat here for you, which is that cryptocurrency investors are predominantly men. I believe around...
Which will surprise no one.
Right. I think it's like more than 40% of them are men, or 40% of men invest or have invested in cryptocurrencies. And that number is way, way, way lower for women. And that's stacked up with kind of my reporting.
So when you go into one of these rooms, you'd say it's like 90% men?
More than 90% men. Sometimes I saw one woman. And of course, there's Gamblers Anonymous meetings throughout the country. I was attending those in the New York area, but it was very, very rare for me to see a woman in there. And very, very rare for me to chat with an individual investor on the phone just as part of my reporting.
And how many people do you think you talk to?
I mean, I chat with dozens of people a week, but the ones trading options, the ones in cryptocurrencies just tend to be men more. And one of the men I quoted in this article, to your point about working and kind of maybe even providing, right?
Yes.
He had a kind of regular job in marketing, and then he discovered cryptocurrencies, and he was like, I can turn this into my profession. He set up 6 screens in his basement and was like looking to arbitrage the prices on different exchanges. And then he flew to Florida to look at potential vacation homes with his winnings. He thought, oh, wow, this is 4 Lambos I have here. He was doing it for himself, but also he felt good that he was able to provide for his family and maybe buy this new vacation home, maybe buy a new car. Then, of course, it ended up tearing apart his family. It was very draining on his marriage. Yes, he told me, he's like, I was getting irritable. His wife was starting to get worried about his gambling. And I heard that from several men. I heard from several men whose marriages ended in divorce.
Yeah.
One man I quoted in the article said that he was not able to stop trading until his wife threatened to leave him. She said, if you don't stop trading, I'm done. And even then, he had a tough time pulling away. He said he would keep downloading the apps, deleting them, downloading the apps, deleting them. And, towards the end, as we got closer to publication, it seemed like he was in a much better place with it. But, I ended up on the phone with several wives through the course of this reporting. And as I was trying to get people on the record, and I wanted to hear from them, hear their experiences. And many of them were really, really not happy, and their marriages were on the verge of being broken apart.
There are, I'm sure, any number of women who are listening to this right now, they're nodding their heads. They have a boyfriend or a partner who is glued to their screen and having their moods just shoot up and down based
right, you're
upon
very
what's
irritable.
happening.
You can't sleep sometimes. You're irritable. You're snapping at people. You might hole up in a basement because you want to claw that loss back. I heard a lot of those stories.
Yes.
You might not be able to stop fidgeting.
Yeah, so given that you've now had more exposure to the downsides of these things, if you decide to go on these behaviors, first, you should be totally clear-eyed and rational about what percentage of your savings or portfolio that you're working with. But the other thing is the psychic toll. One reason why I don't bet on sports as much as I did is that I realized it was making me cranky.
Oh, really?
In a way that was so dumb. Like I'll just describe it. I might have bet like $100 on a particular game, and then I'd be in a bad mood if my team was losing. And even though $100, you know, like I can afford to lose $100, but it's just like that. There's something about losing that, you know, irks you.
Yes.
And there's something about losing based upon a decision you made that irks you, because you're like, oh, I made the wrong decision. Like, oh, da-da-da. And then you find yourself irritable, and then you want to undo it. And then the way to undo it, obviously, is to make another bet that wins. so then you have to say, oh, I guess I have to bet $150 or $200 on something that wins.
You want to claw back those losses. Yeah.
Yes. And because now I'm very vigilant, where it's like when I realized it was screwing with my mood, I was like, well, this is clearly not worth $100 to me. You know, and this is as someone who spent years on the road away from my family. And then now, like, when I'm around my family and I'm like, you know, with one of my kids, and I'm like staring at my phone, pissed off my team is losing. And then I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Like, you know,
I heard that a lot from the men I interviewed for this article. They said they were like in the car with their wives and like they were just hooked on their phones, or they were at a basketball game for their kids and like not watching the game. They were on their phones, stressed out about their portfolios.
Yes. So when you realize that that's happening to you, you should know that's a red flag. You should be like, this should not be affecting my mood. Like, my mood is very important. My family is very important. My enjoyment of my life is very important. And the fact that I was irritated over the loss of like a trivial amount of money in this game, I was like, this is so stupid. Now, if you took it up a notch, I mean, in some cases, people are transfixed because it's actually a material amount of money which is happening for a lot of folks out there. So number one, percentage allocations, just stick to it. Maybe have a loss thing like I did. But number two is be very, very attentive to whether it's actually affecting your emotional state.
I think that's such a good point. And I think anyone getting into these markets, just try to think about the game that's being played around you. You know, I spoke with an incredibly successful professional options trader. And we were chatting about some of these dynamics. I was talking to him about this trading experiment that I did. And again, this is a guy who's been on Wall Street, traded for one of the top market-making professional trading firms out there. Incredibly skilled at what he does. And the way he described it to me is that a rookie investor, like myself, like you, who enters the options market, that's like you playing basketball against LeBron James. And you need to know that before you're walking in. It's going to be very, very difficult for you to beat that game.
Well, sure.
But I think those jackpots can muddle that a little bit for people, and then they don't realize that as much.
Yeah, so the third thing would be to take everything you're seeing with like an enormous grain of salt, where you see everyone posting their winnings. You know, they're not posting their losings. They're not posting the, you know, fractured relationships, the screwed up vacations, the, you know, like squandered life savings.
Yeah.
And it's something I feel for folks who, you know, when you say like, you know, everything's a market now, you know, one thing that's 100% a market is these influencers who are trying to get followings, the rest of it, and like putting stuff out. There's like this like constant pressure. So the third point again is, you know, don't believe everything you're seeing out there. Just imagine that it's being filtered where you're just seeing like the most positive version for that person's interests. And 9 times out of 10, that person's interests are getting you to follow them and do something so that their economics improve.
Definitely. Like whether it's charging you subscription fees for like a course on trading or God knows what, right?
Or just following their trade so their trade does better. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, buy the thing I bought because then you know, the price will go up and, you know, I'll make a little more.
And we've seen that the past few years with these pump and dumps. Yeah, definitely. They're rampant on social media.
And don't be afraid just to sit the whole thing out. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I had multiple friends this past number of days who say they've been like deleting apps or like trying to
is that right?
detox in various ways. No, they were talking about it because they, they were unhappy with some of the oligarchs, recent behaviors or something along those lines. But there is wisdom to that when it comes to some of these trading apps and investing apps and betting apps.
One counselor at a gambling treatment center in Virginia that I interviewed said that when people enter their doors for their inpatient gambling treatment program, and they've seen a roughly 25% increase in patients coming in for gambling in financial markets compared with 4 years ago. He said he sits down with them. He deletes not just the FanDuels and the DraftKings, but the Robinhood, the Webull, the financial news, right? They're deleting traditional brokerage apps from people's phones in order for them to stop gambling.
Yeah, that's what needs to happen.
And some platforms, like think Gamban, these are apps that you can download on your phone to make sure that you can't access those gambling apps for people struggling with compulsive gambling. They've started adding some of the brokerages just a few years ago.
I had a friend who had gotten himself into some trouble, and then he registered with the state, and the state essentially said okay, you're not allowed to do anything, and essentially made it so that none of these apps function for him.
But that's just for sports. My understanding is you cannot do that you cannot do that for the brokerages, and then some of these apps that you can pay for have added the brokerages.
That is a very worthwhile development and innovation. And so I'm going to throw a fourth thing in for this list, which is if you know someone who you think might need some help, you might want to nudge them and be like, hey, I think this behavior has gone a little bit overboard. And if you yourself need help, do get help, and don't blame yourself for what is a compulsive addictive behavior, because it's 100% addictive. It's biological in many ways. And Gunjan has seen, people can come together, get help, get better, get some sort of support. But just trying to beat it yourself, it isn't realistic for a lot of people.
I was so inspired attending these Gamblers Anonymous meetings. I really think that the people who show up, who might have lost everything, have lost their relationships, maybe have lost all of their money, right? But they're showing up to these meetings, sharing, getting support, giving support. It takes so much strength to do that. And I truly thought that many of the men in these rooms were just heroes for getting help and trying to get better one day at a time.
This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. How did you choose which internet service provider to use? The sad thing is, most of us didn't have much of a choice because ISPs operate a lot like monopolies in the regions that they serve. They then use this monopoly position to take advantage of customers, and yes, they even sell your data, your activities to advertisers and big tech companies, and you don't see a dime. That's why I protect my internet surfing and devices with ExpressVPN. When you use ExpressVPN, it's like a magic portal to a perfectly safe and anonymous internet. And don't take my word for it. This is the #1 VPN service according to CNET. It's used by major companies all over the world. So stop handing over your personal data to ISPs and other tech companies who then mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with a VPN I trust to keep my privacy online. Visit expressvpn.com/yang. That's expressvpn.com/yang to get 3 extra months free. Go to expressvpn.com/yang right now to learn more. It is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast historian, journalist, deputy executive editor at The Atlantic, and now author of the brand new book, Stuck: How the Privileged and the Propertied Broke the Engine of American Opportunity. We're going to dig into all of that. Yoni Applebaum. Welcome, Yoni.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here.
So Americans are moving around doing their thing, and then you say there is this 2-step process. So number 1 is zoning. Before zoning came along, people could just build wherever they wanted, I guess. And so which probably had problems for sure. But so when did zoning kick in?
Yeah, this is a really interesting story. Zoning starts in we know the specific place where we first get zoning in America. It's 1885 in Modesto, California. There was land use law before zoning, right? So you couldn't just do something that was going to hurt your neighbors. But they had to show real damage, right? So if you had a tannery with lots of obnoxious, foul-smelling stuff on the property, you couldn't build that next to somebody who was living next to you. But that was how the law worked. You had to show a real harm. People could do what they wanted with their private property right up until the point that they were harming others. And maybe that was creating a fire hazard, or maybe it was, a factory that was polluting. So you could regulate what people could do, but you couldn't say something is perfectly fine, but we're only going to let you do it in one place and not in another place. That was not legal. In Modesto, they've got a problem. The problem is that Modesto is filling up with two populations. One population is white gold rush miners and people who are trying to make it in California. The other population is Chinese Americans who are trying to make it in
times.
California.
Let's go. Chinese American railroad workers.
Yeah, they get kicked off the railroads, and they're trying to find something to do to still have access to the American dream. To survive, right? And there is something that people desperately need in California in these years. The gold rush, they're really it's dirty work. Their clothes are dirty, but they will not stoop to do their own laundry. They consider laundry to be women's work. It gets so, I'm not making this up, it gets so desperate that a clever entrepreneur in San Francisco makes it his business to collect everyone's dirty laundry, to put it on a boat in San Francisco and send it to Hawaii to get washed. And then they return the clean laundry by boat like 6 weeks later back to San Francisco. That's how desperate they are.
Yeah, and the Chinese are like, we'll wash your clothes.
Yeah, great. That's a job. We need a job. This is a job. We're going to make it in America. We'll wash your clothes. So they set up these laundries, and they live in their laundries, right? These are like most small shopkeepers. They live above the business, and they put the laundries into white neighborhoods because that's where the customers are. All of this makes perfect sense. They're doing exactly what everybody else in America is doing. They're chasing opportunity, and the white people in Modesto are really mad about it. And the first thing they try is arson. They try burning down the laundries. And the Chinese entrepreneurs rebuild. They're not going to let somebody drive them out. The next thing they try is vigilante violence. They put on hoods and march through Chinatown and smash windows and beat people up. And again, the Chinese rebuild. The third thing they try is zoning. They write a law which says you can only operate a laundry west of the tracks and south of G Street. And it's a clever law because it doesn't say anything about the Chinese.
Yeah.
But if you look, I pulled an old map of Modesto, and if you look in that year, there's only one block of buildings west of the tracks and south of G Street, and it's got a label on it. It says Chinatown, right? So this is a ghettoization law. This is a law which says all the Chinese need to move into Chinatown. And what they figured out was if you segregate the use of land, you can segregate the population. That's where zoning comes from.
So other communities then see this Modesto zoning and are like, oh, you can do that? Let's do that too.
It takes a little while because it's still kind of blatantly unconstitutional. In California, the elected judges understand their voters hate the Chinese enough to allow it, but it doesn't instantly spread to other states. It jumps to New York City in 1916, where you get the nation's first comprehensive zoning code. And it's the same kind of story. In New York, the problem is that the rich merchants on Fifth Avenue are really ticked off that Jewish garment workers are coming out of the garment lofts, the sweatshops on their lunch breaks, and they're standing on the sidewalk and scaring off their elite customers.
Can't have that, yeah.
Can't have that, right? They complain. They call the cops on them, and they get them hauled away to jail for loitering. But that's a little awkward because, they may be immigrants, but they still vote, and the politicians are not so happy with this. And what they hit on is we can do what Modesto did. We'll put in a zoning ordinance. We'll push these garment workers back into the Lower East Side, and we won't have to deal with them anymore. And the mayor says, well, you can do that, but it's a little obvious if we just do it on Fifth Avenue. So we'll do it citywide so that it's not so obvious to the voters exactly what we're doing here. And you get a citywide zoning ordinance that for the first time really sorts things out. But it has a pernicious effect. It's not just about pushing one population down. It's about limiting the ability of people to build, to meet demand. And they need to take it nationwide. This is the catch. The guy who comes up with the ordinance, he says, I know this is unconstitutional. I know the Supreme Court is going to strike it down because you obviously can't do this. But there's a loophole. If it's spread widely enough by the time the first challenge gets to the Supreme Court, they'll uphold it. So if we spread zoning nationwide quickly enough, we can pull this off and turn something that's blatantly illegal into something that's legal. And he does. He proselytizes for this, and zoning starts to spread nationwide.
So zoning is the first big step, and then the second step is giving people in a neighborhood essentially veto rights over any new development. And Francis Fukuyama coined the term Vetocracy, which is, hey, I might not be able to do something, but I can keep you from doing it too. So now no one can do anything. So that kind of freezes a lot of neighborhoods and development. And I will say, if you live in a particular place, it's generally in your economic interest to kind of keep a ton of new housing stock from going up, because then you wind up reducing your own values because of, what have you, it being overcrowded or noise or small lots or traffic or, you name it. So that ends up mushrooming in various ways. I think people can see pretty clearly in their heads, like, oh, okay, if you don't build any new housing stock, then that's going to end up pushing people out over time. And now you fast forward, that phenomenon has hit particularly hard in major urban areas, which tend to be blue. So the ones that people think of in American life when they think of this would be New York, San Francisco, Boston. I think those are the big three that I think of. You could throw some other cities in the mix, but that there winds up being this sense, and this was like one thing that came up in the argument you're making that I thought was interesting. The suggestion was that, look, if you made things better and more efficient, there'd be more people moving into these cities because these are more affluent, higher productivity zones, and
Yes.
the economic opportunities would be better. That you would wind up just with like many, many more people in the New Yorks, the Bostons, the San Franciscos.
But that's not what's happened, right? Like it's a really interesting split. For 200 years, Americans moved to the places with faster growing economies. And they weren't always the same places. Moving to Flint, Michigan in 1920 was a terrific bet. You're going to give your kids a much better life. Moving there in 2020 is not a terrific bet.
I have been to Flint, Michigan, and it is not terrific. I mean, sorry. I mean, the people there are great, but it's a hard hit community.
The people are great. I spent a week there just walking around, talking to developers, to civic leaders, to ordinary residents, trying to understand, everybody there, their grandparents at most moved to Flint, right? Like it was a place that really sprang up out of nothing. And so the mobility is in their blood, like that they all moved there. And I wanted to understand why people are still there. And when you talk to people about their housing stories, just the way you narrated yours, right? What I heard were stories like, I wanted to get out. I had a buddy who had rented an apartment down in Miami. I went down there. I got a job. He moved on. I couldn't pay the rent by myself on the job that I found. So I came back to Flint. Or I'd really like to be with my sisters in Texas, but I'm paying $140 a month in rent here. And I asked her what she's paying, and I can't afford that. Or I have a house, and even if I sold it and took the sales price, it wouldn't be enough for a down payment in a place with jobs. So you talk to people, and they're kind of stuck in cities like that. I can't stress how weird that is, right? Like America, for 200 years, the gap between the richest and the poorest places in America was narrowing because people would move from poor places to rich places. If you were a janitor in Alabama 50 years ago and you moved to San Francisco, you'd pay more in rent. Your cost of living would go up, but you'd make a heck of a lot more as a janitor. You'd end up way ahead, like 40% ahead.
Yeah.
And today, if that same janitor in Alabama tries moving to San Francisco, he'll still make more. In fact, he'll make a lot more. But his housing costs won't just cancel it out. It'll leave him net behind. He'll have less money in the bank account at the end of every month. The rational choice is to stay making a lot less. And it's not just that he's not making more as a janitor. The cool thing about moving, and I think really something that we don't focus on enough, is that moving is a chance to redefine your whole life, right? When you move from one place to another, you're getting a new set of social relationships. You're usually switching jobs. You're often switching occupations. You arrive, maybe you're working in an old declining industry where you're coming from. But when you land in a new city, you look around for where the jobs are. And the jobs are usually in the fast growing industries. And so it often is a way to get people to switch from the declining parts of the economy to the ascending parts of the economy. When there's a negative shock, right, that closes a factory, a free trade deal, or automation, we rely in this country on people being able to get new jobs that are being fostered by the savings that these things have achieved. That's the whole deal, right? Like, we'll lose some, but there's creative destruction, and there'll be creation coming out of it too. But if you're stuck in the place where the old job was and you can't move to the city where the new job is, then you're just screwed.
So you've diagnosed a problem very, very compellingly. And because you're an historian, you actually kind of walk us through it in a way that people are like, oh, okay, I can see how that happened. So is there a path towards being either less stuck or unstuck?
Yeah, and I think this is really good news because the changes are relatively recent. And I want people to see how recent those changes are and how many of them are inadvertent. And that, there are problems in America that have been here from the founding. This is one we've created in recent decades out of a set of changes that nobody quite thought through. And it's relatively easily reversible too. It's also a problem that can be largely addressed at the state and local level. The federal government has a role to play, but you don't need to wait on our dysfunctional Congress. You don't need to bet on the current administration. If people are looking for change in their own communities, this is something that they can do tomorrow. And I've got sort of three big, broad solutions that I think we should pursue.
Please, let's go. Let's go local. Yeah. Let's go. Let's do it.
Let's go local, right? The first one is consistency. Zoning rules are wildly inconsistent from place to place. If you master New York City's zoning code with its different designations and its overlays, you do those other combinations. There's hundreds of different zoning designations that are possible in New York. If you want to build in New York, your first move is to hire a lawyer, not an architect. That makes it really, really hard for anyone to take any solution to scale, right? A building that works in one part of the city simply won't be allowed in another part of the city. And a building that works well in New York, you can't build it in any other city. So if we get consistent zoning designations across cities, a much smaller number of categories that restore the right to build as of right? So you can just say, hey, I'm going to put up a building. It's in compliance. I don't need to go through an elaborate review process. I can just do this right now. That would unleash a tremendous wave of construction in the places that we most need it. And to the extent that builders, designers figure out good solutions in one place, they could take it across the country.
Wow.
Which you can't do right now. Wow. Construction is one of our most local industries, because if you figured out how to build in Denver, it does not help you build in New York. And if you know how to build in San Francisco, you can't go build in Boston. So if we can get these consistent rules, we can really scale the solutions, which would be huge, and get the efficiency gains that construction just has not had over the last 50 years. The second thing is we need to be a little bit more tolerant. And you've already run into this, I imagine, trying to figure out how to let people rent spare bedrooms. We have a lot of regulations in this country that imagine that there is only one solution for housing, the single family home. By the time I am old, I may not love the number of stairs I have in my house. I may need a house that's much more accessible, but it's not in my neighborhood because you can't build them here, right? So if you allow a greater variety of housing styles, you can allow people to find the thing at each moment of their life that's going to be the solution for them. I think that's huge. And then the last is a word we've thrown around already. It's abundance. We have a 50-year deficit to make up. I think one reason that building is hard is that people's personal observations don't square with what the economists are telling them, right? So they see a new building go up in their neighborhood and somebody says, we're going to add more housing supply. We're going to meet the demand. It's going to be great. And then the next year, their rent went up anyway. And they say, see, it doesn't work. Building just makes things more expensive. But it's like you're adding a teaspoon to a bathtub of need, right? It's what you've actually got to do is build enough housing that the prices come down. And there are cities that are trying this. Austin, Texas has actually seen rents decline by 7% this year. It put up enough new housing that the rents came down. You can do it, but it's not going to happen one building on the block. It's not going to happen in just one city. If we tackle this as a national crisis and say, hey, we've got to let people move into the places where they want to go, we've got to connect people with opportunity, then we can really scale the solutions.